A short video, one word, soon. As a U.S. aircraft carrier moves closer to Iran, Tehran's allies across the Middle East are issuing warnings and signaling readiness for potential confrontation. From Yemen's Red Sea coast to militia strongholds in Iraq, the messaging is consistent. If hostilities begin, they say they are prepared to respond. The latest signal comes from Yemen, where Houthi forces released a brief montage showing a ship engulfed in flames. According to reports from AP, Iran International, and other media outlets, the caption reads simply, soon. The clip does not provide details and does not name specific targets. Analysts and international media describe it as a warning, though it does not confirm an imminent attack or identify who might be targeted. The Houthis themselves have offered no explanation, leaving the message deliberately ambiguous. The video's ambiguity appears intentional. The group did not name objectives, but international media described the release as a signal that they could resume operations against Red Sea shipping, one of the world's most critical maritime corridors. Trade organizations and shipping analysts have estimated that the Red Sea and Suez route moves approximately 12 to 15% of global commerce, making any disruption significant for international supply chains. This would not be an empty threat based on the group's track record. The Houthis have demonstrated capability in previous campaigns, according to incident reports compiled by international media and maritime security organizations. Over the past 2 years, the group launched what reports describe as more than 100 attacks on commercial and military vessels transiting the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden. The campaign, which the group said was meant to pressure Israel during the Gaza conflict, succeeded in disrupting global shipping patterns. Reuters has reported ship sinkings and multiple incidents since the campaign began, though the exact count varies depending on the source and methodology used for tallying attacks. The economic impact extended far beyond the immediate region, with shipping costs increasing and delivery times lengthening for goods moving between Asia and Europe. Major shipping companies rerouted their vessels around the Cape of Good Hope, accepting higher fuel costs and longer transit times rather than risk passage through contested waters. Those operations paused following developments in the Gaza situation, but the Houthis never announced a permanent end to their campaign. Group leaders have repeatedly indicated that operations could resume if circumstances warranted. The soon video suggests that moment may be approaching as tensions between the United States and Iran reach elevated levels, though the actual timing and targets remain unspecified. The timing of the Houthi video is significant. A U.S. aircraft carrier strike group is now moving toward the region as Washington issues warnings to Tehran. President Donald Trump has discussed military options, and the carrier's movement increases pressure and military capabilities in the region. Whether the deployment represents a signal intended to deter, preparation for potential operations, or both depends on decisions that have not been confirmed publicly. The Houthis and other Iranian-aligned groups present the American military buildup as aggressive posturing against a regional ally, rather than defensive positioning. They frame their own preparations as defensive measures. Washington and its allies typically describe such preparations as threats. This dispute over how to characterize the actions of each side remains unresolved and shapes how different audiences interpret the current situation. The Houthis have demonstrated resilience despite years of conflict and military operations against their positions. The group controls significant territory in Yemen, including the capital Sana'a, and has developed drone and missile capabilities that have proven effective against both land and maritime targets, according to military analysts and incident reports. A day before the Houthi video emerged, Iraq's Kataib Hezbollah raised the stakes with a statement that the group framed as a call to prepare if Iran is attacked. The Iran-aligned armed group declared its readiness to enter any future conflict in defense of the Islamic Republic, according to the statement released through official channels and reported by regional media. The group's statement urged those willing to confront what it described as adversarial forces to prepare for what it called a comprehensive conflict. Kataib Hezbollah portrayed Iran as what it termed a fortress for the Muslim world. a state it said has supported various causes for more than 4 decades, regardless of sect, race, or nationality. This framing presents Iran not as a sectarian actor, but as a defender of broader principles, according to the group's own characterization. The statement was issued amid current U.S.-Iran tensions and was clearly timed to signal that any American military action against Iran would face responses from multiple directions. According to the group's own messaging, Kataib Hezbollah operates in Iraq, where American forces maintain a presence, making its warnings relevant to U.S. military planners assessing regional risks. The language in the Kataib Hezbollah statement was stark. The group accused Iran's enemies, specifically naming Israel, of seeking to weaken or destroy the Islamic Republic. According to the statement, these forces aim not only to target Iran, but to undermine what the group described as values across the region and beyond. The warning to adversaries used extreme rhetoric. The group said any conflict against the Islamic Republic would bring severe consequences for those who initiate hostilities. The statement used threatening language about the fate of enemies, employing rhetoric of annihilation without detailing specific objectives or capabilities. Such language should be understood as the group's own messaging rather than as confirmed operational capacity. The statement also suggested what it called extreme operations, though no independent evidence indicates immediate operational planning for such actions. The reference signals that Kataib Hezbollah and similar groups frame any potential conflict as existential from their perspective, justifying maximum commitment in their rhetoric. The Kataib Hezbollah statement portrayed Iran in terms designed to resonate beyond sectarian boundaries, describing the Islamic Republic as a defender of what it called the oppressed regardless of their background. This framing, according to the group's own messaging, challenges characterizations of Iran as a purely sectarian actor, instead presenting Tehran as a principled state. According to the statement, Iran has supported various movements and populations for more than 4 decades, a reference to the period since the 1979 Islamic Revolution. The group cited Iran's regional role as evidence of this commitment, arguing that Tehran's motivations extend beyond narrow calculations. This represents how Iran's allies understand and justify their alignment with the Islamic Republic, according to their own public communications. The statement described the current moment as requiring preparation for potential conflict. The call extended broadly to anyone who opposes what the statement characterized as domination by adversarial powers. This framing reflects an attempt to position the potential conflict as one involving wider stakes, according to the group's own rhetoric. U.S. officials have confirmed that the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln and several guided missile destroyers have entered the Central Command region, which encompasses the Middle East. According to reports from Reuters and other outlets, the deployment increases American offensive and defensive capabilities in the region as tensions with Iran intensify. President Trump has described the deployment as an armada heading toward Iran just in case, language that combines military positioning with claimed preference for avoiding conflict. The carrier strike group brings substantial firepower to the region, including aircraft capable of sustained operations and destroyers armed with cruise missiles. The Pentagon has also reportedly deployed additional fighter aircraft and air defense systems, according to defense officials cited by media outlets. For Iran and its allies, they present the American military buildup as the latest in a pattern of U.S. military pressure against countries that refuse to accept Washington's demands. The carrier deployment is characterized by these groups not as a defensive measure, but as preparation for potential offensive action. Washington describes such deployments as defensive and deterrent in nature. This characterization dispute remains central to how different parties understand the current situation. The regional picture has been complicated by statements from Gulf states that host American military facilities. The United Arab Emirates has reportedly indicated that it would not allow its territory, waters, or airspace to be used for what it termed aggressive attacks against Iran, a position that complicates logistical considerations for potential American military operations. The UAE statement reflects the difficult position facing Gulf states, which maintain security relationships with the United States while also having significant economic and diplomatic ties with Iran. These countries understand that any regional conflict would affect them directly, potentially making their territories involved regardless of their own preferences. Iran has called on regional states to deny the United States certain basing rights for offensive operations, and some appear to be responding with cautionary statements. The prospect of Gulf states placing conditions on American military access represents a factor in U.S. planning and reflects the degree to which regional actors are seeking to avoid being drawn into a conflict between larger powers. Analysis from centers tracking regional developments, including critical threats and various media outlets, indicates that the statements from Houthis and Kataib Hezbollah appear to be part of parallel messaging among groups aligned with Iran. This network, sometimes described as the Axis of Resistance, includes Hezbollah in Lebanon, various Iraqi militias, the Houthis in Yemen, and other groups throughout the region. The pattern shows that while Tehran maintains a formally defensive posture in its official communications, allied groups issue warnings of readiness to respond and use strong rhetoric about consequences for adversaries. Analysts describe this as creating psychological pressure on Washington, Tel Aviv, and global shipping interests, demonstrating that any attack on Iran could trigger responses from multiple directions. Whether this represents centralized coordination or parallel decision-making by groups with shared interests and frameworks is difficult to verify independently. Each group maintains its own leadership and pursues its own local objectives, though they share common characterizations of the United States and Israel as primary threats and Iran as a key ally. The degree of operational coordination versus rhetorical alignment remains a subject of analysis and debate. The Houthis' previous Red Sea campaign demonstrated the group's ability to affect global commerce far beyond the immediate conflict zone, according to maritime security reports and shipping industry analysis. The attacks forced shipping companies to make difficult calculations about risk versus cost, with many ultimately choosing to avoid the Red Sea entirely despite the significant additional expense of routing around Africa. The campaign succeeded in drawing international attention to the Gaza conflict, which the Houthis cited as their primary motivation. By affecting commercial shipping in waters distant from the immediate conflict, the group demonstrated that regional instability would have consequences extending to global supply chains. This message resonates as the Houthis signal potential resumption of operations amid U.S.-Iran tensions. For global shipping interests, the Soon video represents a warning that the relative calm of recent months may be at risk. If Houthis resume operations against Red Sea traffic, the consequences would extend to consumers worldwide through higher shipping costs and longer delivery times, according to industry analysts. The group's demonstrated track record makes such warnings credible to maritime security observers. The strategic logic underlying statements from both the Houthis and Kataib Hezbollah reflects an understanding of what analysts describe as asymmetric approaches that have guided Iranian military doctrine for decades. Unable to match American conventional military power, Iran and its allies have developed capabilities designed to impose costs that adversaries would find significant, even if they cannot defeat U.S. forces in direct military confrontation. This approach includes missiles and drones capable of striking targets throughout the region, according to military analysts. It includes the ability to affect maritime choke points like the Strait of Hormuz and the Bab el-Mandeb Strait at the southern entrance to the Red Sea. And it includes networks of allied groups positioned throughout the region who could conduct operations from multiple directions. The warnings being issued by Iranian allies signal that these capabilities would be employed in the event of conflict, according to their own statements. From the perspective of these groups, the warnings serve what they describe as a defensive purpose, deterring attack by making clear the costs that would follow. Whether American planners view these warnings as credible deterrence or as requiring response will significantly influence how the current situation evolves. Military analysts have warned that any U.S. attack on Iran could trigger responses from multiple Iranian allies, potentially creating a multi-front situation that would strain resources and affect the entire region. The statements from Houthis and Kataib Hezbollah suggest this is what Iran's allies are preparing for, according to their own communications. In such a scenario, according to analyst assessments, American forces in Iraq could face increased pressure from Iranian-aligned militias. Israel could face attacks from Hezbollah in Lebanon and potentially from other directions. Commercial shipping in the Red Sea and Persian Gulf could face renewed threats. American facilities throughout the region would require reinforced defenses. The prospect of responses from multiple directions represents what analysts describe as the core of Iranian deterrence strategy. By demonstrating that any attack on Iran could trigger regional consequences, Tehran hopes to convince adversaries that the cost of military action would exceed potential benefits. The current statements from allied groups serve to reinforce this message, according to regional analysts. From Tehran's perspective and that of its allies, they present the current situation as another instance of American pressure against nations that refuse to accept Washington's demands. The military buildup, the threats, and the economic pressure through sanctions are characterized by these groups not as responses to their own actions, but as continuation of what they describe as decades of American hostility toward the Islamic Republic. And this framing shapes how Iranian allies understand their own role, according to their public communications. Groups like Kataib Hezbollah and the Houthis present themselves not as aggressors, but as defenders of a regional order that resists what they characterize as domination. Their preparations for potential conflict are characterized in their own messaging as defensive measures necessary to deter attack. Washington and its allies typically characterize these same preparations as threats that justify American military positioning. This dispute over characterization, defense versus threat, deterrence versus provocation, remains unresolved and shapes how different audiences interpret the statements and actions of all parties involved. President Trump's public statements have contributed to the elevated tensions by discussing military options regarding Iran. Trump has described the carrier deployment as an armada and suggested that force might be used under certain circumstances. While Trump has also said he hopes force will not be necessary, his conditional language leaves open various possibilities. Trump's communication approach, which combines positioning statements with claims of preference for avoiding conflict, creates uncertainty about American intentions. Iranian leaders and their allies cannot be certain whether the military buildup is intended as pressure to influence behavior or as preparation for potential military action. This uncertainty may be intentional, but it also increases risks of miscalculation by various parties. The statements from Iranian allies appear designed in part to respond to Trump's comments by emphasizing that military action would carry consequences. By signaling readiness for regional responses, groups like the Houthis and Kataib Hezbollah are attempting to strengthen what they describe as deterrence and influence American calculations about costs and benefits. The geopolitical situation carries significant implications for global energy markets and international commerce, according to economic analysts. The Strait of Hormuz, through which approximately 1/5 of the world's oil passes, according to energy agency estimates, could become a focal point if tensions escalate. Similarly, the Red Sea route that the Houthis have previously affected carries substantial commercial traffic between Asia and Europe. Any significant disruption to these maritime corridors would affect global markets, according to economic analysts. Oil prices would likely increase, affecting consumers worldwide. Shipping costs would rise as vessels take longer routes or face higher insurance premiums. Supply chains already dealing with various pressures would face additional challenges. These economic considerations create pressure on all parties to avoid conflict, but they also factor into calculations. Iran's ability to affect critical choke points provides Tehran with leverage that complements its military capabilities, according to strategic analysts. The Houthis' demonstrated ability to disrupt Red Sea shipping extends this leverage to a group that might otherwise have limited influence in great power dynamics. Despite the military positioning and strong rhetoric from various parties, diplomatic channels reportedly remain open. Both Iranian and American officials have indicated that they prefer diplomatic resolution to military conflict, even as they prepare for various scenarios. The question is whether these channels can produce outcomes acceptable to all parties before dynamics create their own momentum. The core issues driving the situation, Iran's regional relationships, its nuclear program, American sanctions, and military pressure, have proven resistant to diplomatic resolution for decades. Previous attempts at agreements have not produced lasting results, leaving various parties skeptical that negotiations can succeed. This history complicates current diplomatic efforts. For Iranian allies issuing warnings of readiness for conflict, the diplomatic track may seem less relevant than demonstrating capability. However, their statements also serve purposes related to diplomacy by emphasizing the costs of military action and potentially influencing calculations about whether to pursue negotiated solutions rather than risk regional consequences. The strong language and statements from Kataib Hezbollah and other groups should be understood as rhetoric that may or may not reflect actual operational capabilities, according to analysts. Groups often use extreme language during periods of tension to signal commitment and attempt to influence adversary calculations. Whether such rhetoric translates into specific operational plans requires independent verification that is typically unavailable. The threatening language about the fate of adversaries in the Kataib Hezbollah statement, for example, represents the group's own messaging rather than confirmed military capacity. Similarly, the Houthi soon video signals intent or warning, but does not confirm specific targeting or timing. Analysts recommend distinguishing between what groups say they will do and what they have demonstrated ability to accomplish. That said, the Houthis have demonstrated capability through their previous Red Sea campaign, and various Iranian-aligned groups have conducted operations against American and allied targets in recent years, according to incident reports. The track record suggests that warnings should not be dismissed, even if specific claims require verification. As the American carrier group approaches and Iranian allies issue parallel warnings, the region watches to see whether the current situation will follow the pattern of previous tensions, elevated rhetoric followed by de-escalation without actual conflict, or whether it represents something more significant. The soon video from the Houthis and the statements from Kataib Hezbollah suggest that Iran's allies believe the latter is increasingly possible, according to their own communications. The coming days and weeks will be closely watched. Military movements, diplomatic exchanges, and public statements will all be analyzed for signs of either escalation or de-escalation. The margin for misunderstanding is narrow, and miscalculation by any party could trigger consequences that all claim to want to avoid. For now, the message from Iran's allies is consistent. They are monitoring the situation, they present themselves as ready to respond, and they warn that any attack on Iran would be met with regional consequences. Whether this message succeeds in influencing American calculations or contributes to a different dynamic remains to be seen as the situation continues to unfold. The word soon hanging over the image of a burning ship captures the current ambiguity. Something may be coming, whether de-escalation, diplomatic engagement, or escalation. The various actors are positioning themselves and issuing statements that will shape how events unfold. Iran's allies have stated their position through their own communications. They present themselves as defenders prepared to respond if attacked. Their warnings are framed as intended to deter, but they also signal readiness. The United States has stated its position as well, deploying forces and discussing options while claiming to prefer diplomatic solutions. Between these positions lies the space where the situation will be resolved, one way or another. The statements from Houthis and Kataib Hezbollah emphasize potential costs of military action, while American deployments demonstrate capability and options. How this dynamic evolves will determine whether the region faces escalation or finds a path toward reduced tensions. The situation remains fluid and closely watched throughout the region and beyond.